Along with Jake Kiley, the Vancouver Canucks made another free agent signing in a guy named Brogan Rafferty. You might not know who he is, but I'm making this video a day later because, first off, I was sleeping, so I didn't actually get the notification. But secondly, his story is just so incredible here that I really wanted to highlight that in this free agent video here today. Brogan Rafferty is a 23-year-old right-handed defenseman who most recently played with the Quinnipiac Bobcats in the NCAA. Now, his numbers throughout the college leagues, not necessarily super amazing. Last season, he got himself 24 points in 38 games played with the Bobcats, and that's pretty good for a right-handed defenseman, but in terms of his own team, he was actually third in defender points. And just thinking about it like that, you could imagine how far down he is on the normal list of NCAA defenders in terms of points. Rafferty was 7th on his team in points, but, you know, he was playing on a pretty good Quinnipiac team, so there's that too. Rafferty is a guy who, in my opinion, has one of the best comeback stories and one of the best underdog stories that we've seen in a while. Very similar to Josh Tevez, who the Vancouver Canucks recently signed and played, by the way. Rafferty is a guy who was a really late bloomer, and he wasn't really supposed to be as good as he is today. For our source, we're going to go over to the New Haven Register. This was an article published over 2 years ago. Quinnipiac freshman Brogan Rafferty already drawing attention from NHL scouts. This was an incredible read. I suggest you all go down in the description to read it. We're going to be covering some of the points here that are discussed in the article. The article opens up about how Rafferty, who is a freshman defender, or at least he was at the time, he's got some NHL scouts talking to him and all that. It's pretty cool. But it also brings up a few things that Rafferty has had to go through throughout his season as a freshman, and it starts off by one of the most dubious things that anybody could go through: being mistaken for a murderer. Yeah, that's right. Brogan Rafferty shares his name with a sentenced aggravated murderer, somebody who has been sentenced to life without parole. And of course, the article brings up the hockey player Brogan Rafferty, and he talks about how this Brogan Rafferty isn't the infamous Craigslist killer sentenced to life without parole in 2012. That fact wasn't so clear in 2011, when both were 16-year-old high school students in the Midwest. One local TV news station in Ohio used the wrong photo during a report on the murder suspect. Eventually, the station issued an apology, but this is just one of the interesting pieces that Brogan Rafferty has had attached to his name. I'm talking about the hockey player here. And interestingly enough, Brogan Rafferty, who is a right-handed defenseman, he wasn't always a defenseman. He was actually a forward, up until his senior year in high school where he switched to defense. So you could just imagine some of the diversity within his game, let's just say. But going through this New Haven Register article, there are a few other things that are really interesting to note. First off, he was diagnosed with scoliosis as an adolescent, which some of you guys might know about, but the article actually goes over here. Coordination wasn't always a strong suit either. As a kid growing up in the Chicago suburb of Dundee, he says he was so clumsy he couldn't even hit a baseball. The trouble was due in part to adolescent scoliosis, a curving of the spine that required correcting. Now, I personally have a few friends who have scoliosis and who had to get surgeries to get past that. It's incredible how this guy was able to overcome that and eventually find his way onto an NHL roster. But that's not all. Look at the next paragraph in this article. At age 6, Rafferty's grandmother sensed something wrong with his eyes. Doctors diagnosed him with amblyopia, a sight disorder that reduces vision to one eye. Early detection helped improve his condition, though he's still considered legally blind in his right eye. His binocular vision is perfectly fine with contact lenses and is only affected when he closes an eye. Which is crazy to think about too. Look at this quote, it's the next paragraph from Rafferty himself. I can still see shapes and stuff when I cover one eye, I just can't read. It's something I was born with, so I never knew what it was like to have really good vision. I don't know if it's helped my game, if it's made me think more on the ice instead of taking more for granted. And despite all this, Rafferty still worked his way up. He didn't get drafted into the USHL until he was 19. He was 19 when he got drafted. So when he played his first and only USHL season, he was 20, turning 21 basically. And then after that, he went over to Quinnipiac and he found himself in the eyes of NHL scouts. As for the way he plays, he's placed top 6 on his team in scoring for the past 3 years. He was actually 7th this year, but the Quinnipiac Bobcats were pretty darn good. So, going over the rest of the Bobcats, there were a few other really good players. Chase Prisky is a guy who comes to mind. He's the immediate standout amongst that team. But Brogan Rafferty is a guy who was a forward and is now a defender. He does have a few slick mitts. There are a few clips of him on Twitter driving the play and doing some pretty good passes over to his guys on the open side. It's interesting to watch, and he's a guy who probably has the skill to maybe play a few games here and there and actually look like he belongs. Rafferty is a guy who moves the puck up well and everything. He's a solid defender, which is why the Canucks had their eyes on him. Honestly, if you ask me, I think we're probably going to play Rafferty at least once during these final few games here in the season, and whatever happens next year, whether that be Vancouver or Utica, which is more likely, Rafferty is a guy who has an underdog story, and he's now finally made it. He's finally made it after some years of being confused for a killer and having these health problems. He's now on an NHL roster. So good for you, man. Good for you. He probably pans out as the same way as Tevez does, maybe as a top AHL guy, but who could probably play a few NHL games here and there. He is 23, so he does have some room to grow, in comparison, of course, to Tevez, who is 24, so the room is a little bit more in Rafferty's favor, but you never know. Either one of these guys could become NHL stars, but Rafferty is a guy who has worked his butt off to get himself to this spot. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Plus, and that's Troll9 Gaming, and bye.